Well, hello, hello. How are you doing, Lolo?
Hey Perry, I'm doing pretty well. And yourself?
Oh, I'm doing great, doing great. I am in a new setting, and people may be noticing the new background for all that's going on here. Things have been interesting, and that is part of the contributing reason to why we did not have anything up last week. It was just a little much, and
Good
yeah,
times.
um, a few more changes ahead, but at least we'll be in this setting for the next little bit, and hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit ahead and still kind of playing catch up though. So, all right. So this week we've got Mosiah 18 through 24. This is going to be the story of basically how we get back to Zarahemla. And there's going to be some baptisms, there's going to be some bondage, not in the fun way.
I
And
was like,
then we're going
hey.
to and then we're going
Oh,
to end up back in Zarahemla, making it so that King Mosiah is very happy. Um, but first, we have Mosiah 18. And so I remember from last week, we have Alma, who is Alma the Elder, escaping while the priests of Noah are freaking out at Abinadi. And he makes his way out into the woods. And he repeats all the words of Abinadi. And this is supposedly where we're going to get a lot of the stuff that Abinadi said. Again, I don't know how like Limhi and his people are all aware of what Abinadi said.
I
But
was
that's a
like,
problem for
did they get it off Twitter? Did he
I
have
there are a few things he says
Insta?
publicly that they definitely could have caught, and maybe that's the only stuff that's applicable because when he's in the room with the priest, he's just talking about the law of Moses, and then talking about Jesus and quoting scripture that shouldn't, you know, be there. Um,
Other issues, not
yeah,
that
yeah,
one.
again, as we concluded last week, Abinadi is a witch, and that is
That's
what we
right.
do with witches. Um,
That's right. That's right. I forgot. My bad. Silly me.
So Abinadi is dead. Alma is spreading the word about Abinadi, and some people are like, "Hey, that Abinadi dude, he seemed pretty friggin' cool. We want to follow this Jesus dude." And Alma is like, "Friggin' sweet. Here's this body of water. Let's do some baptizing." And he gets into the water with Helam, and he and Helam decide that they are going to do this baptism thing together. And so in verse 14, it says that Alma and Helam were buried in the water, and they arose and came forth out of the water, rejoicing, being filled with the Spirit. That both of them were buried in the water. And then verse 15 makes a distinction that Alma, because Alma goes into the water a second time to do some baptizing, and he does the baptism in the same manner, um, but he doesn't bury himself. He only buries in the water the person who's going to be baptized because he had already been baptized. So this makes it really really clear that they baptized each other at the same time simultaneously, right? Like this is they go into the water together. I don't know
I'm
how
I'm
mechanically.
imagining like the Olympic synchronized swimmers, like synchronized baptism to like Madonna's Like a Virgin is all I can picture. And I need that to be what really happened.
Are
Okay.
you saying are you saying that Helam was the one who touched Alma for the very first time? Because
I mean,
it's not it's not Alma the Elder that I have the queer theory about. That's we'll get into that later. Um,
Madonna she is loved and can be used in any gender and any sexuality
I guess
experience.
that's true. I guess that's true.
Just saying it's
Uh,
Madonna. So
so yeah, when you see that Arnold Friedberg painting, just think
yeah,
like a virgin.
that made my day. Thank you.
All right. Um, so the thing that I was wondering about when I was reading through this section was how much did this particular story impact Joseph Smith and Oliver's own story about their baptism, because they have a pretty similar experience, right? There is
Mm-hmm.
nobody in their milieu that has the right authority to do the baptizing, and so like how do you actually go about being baptized by proper authority? And I could see this story reasonably being the kind of the inciting question to that experience. The problem is that with like the Mosiah priority
Yeah.
form of writing, this is way too early in the process. And it would actually be a challenge to the Mosiah priority theory if this were the story that impacted their decision to go out and do that.
Hmm.
So I was curious about whether or not this was a challenge and if I needed to reach out to Brent Metcalf and say, how do you deal with this or not?
Yeah.
Um, so I went to Joseph Smith History to get at least the faithful version of this narrative to understand a little bit better. And um, Joseph Smith puts this like inquiry into baptism and the Lord, like just kind of or to the Lord in the process of their doing the work of translation.
Hmm.
And it basically says that by May of 1829, they decided to go into the woods and pray about baptism. And they have
Okay.
this miraculous experience. They do the baptizing and all that. And they have the Aaronic priesthood, and things are super awesome and great. And
Hmm.
all this happens in May of 1829. Um, what that doesn't tell us anything, though, is
Right.
why they have this question. So that still remains an open issue. However, if you scroll down a little bit further, or if you continue on the page and go to where you have Oliver Cowdery's account of the events, um, what we have is that it was after writing the account given of the Savior's ministry to the remnant of the seed of Jacob upon this continent
Hmm.
that they begin to have this question. The question might be asked: have men authority to administer in the name of Christ? And like that whole paragraph there, I think this is like the fourth, yeah, it's the fourth paragraph of Oliver Cowdery's testimony down there, indicates that it is after they had translated the Savior's ministry to the Nephites that they had, or really to the Lehites broadly, that they had this question about baptism and how it was supposed to be done in like the modern age and how they're supposed to have the
Hmm.
authority to do it and all of that. And that they then go into the woods, they pray about it, they have this miraculous experience and all of that. Um, so that puts the inciting question all the way down, or the inciting incident to the question all the way into third Nephi, which is much later in the process and actually fits well with Mosiah priority. Uh, this does not fit, or this
Yeah.
story does not fit with all of that. And so the facts happen to align with Mosiah priority pretty well. And that potential challenge to the theory falls apart here.
Hmm.
Also, the way that they go about doing the baptism, the way they actually like experience the receiving of authority and all of that is more in line with the third Nephi method of, you have a divine figure appearing, bestowing authority upon people, them doing the ordinances and all of that under the direction of that divine figure, under that divine messenger, who
Hmm.
in the third Nephi account is Christ, a member of the Godhead, but in the Joseph Smith story is an angel essentially bearing with him the name of Christ, as would have been like the scriptural model from before, and bestowing that authority, and then when they actually do the baptisms, Joseph baptizes Oliver first, and then Oliver baptizes Joseph. These are separate baptisms that happen one at a time. It isn't this both people at the same time like Alma and Helam. So
Right.
yeah, which again fits more with third Nephi and all of
Yeah.
that as with um, what we see in this section in the Book of Mosiah.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, Mosiah priority is saved from the threat of the waters of Mormon.
Nice.
Yeah, I worried about it for a few minutes, but
I was like I did lose some sleep. Just
it,
a
it
little bit
was
though.
it was touch and go there for a little bit. Um, Oh, and by the way, it is 450 people that are in like Alma's group, which is a pretty sizable chunk of people in the Bronze Age.
I was
And then,
like, I do need to let you know. I don't know, but if you notice in the background, that's a June bug flying around that I can't catch. And if it lands on me,
just hit the mute button first.
I was like, I just need you to know, like, if I suddenly go into a picture, it's because I'm trying to get the June bug off me.
Gotcha. Okay, so chapters 19 through 22 deal with the people of Limhi. And what you have here is God kind of being a jerk to the people of Limhi
Yeah.
because Noah was a bad dude. And
So it's clearly their fault.
yeah, there's an argument. I guess like the passages do try to indicate that like Limhi's people were less valiant, less righteous. And so they need to be afflicted for that. The Lord is slow to hear their cries for like mercy and deliverance and protection. But one of the things that came up in my study here was, for reasons of another project, I have been engaging with a lot of apologetics, and one of the apologetic arguments for like Book of Mormon complexity that has come up is that there are like these distinct cultures that appear in the text, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to like give this the best case that it possibly can receive, but
Yeah.
there really aren't that many. And the Lamanites are supposed to be one, but if you get into like what's the daily life of a Lamanite like, what are the social norms and mores that they have to follow,
Yeah.
like what feasts do they celebrate, what like anything
Any
really, like above like
literally
just the most
anything.
superficial like stuff, like what do we actually know about them. And you get from the Lamanites that they're like this nomadic people that hunt wild beasts, that barely even wear a loincloth, that at least they're monogamous, but that's about like the nicest thing that you can like say about them. To
So
in this
basically what the Walt Disney in the 60s would show as savages.
Right. Right. This is basically what you would see in Peter Pan. To like they actually have like a king in this particular story. Uh, and the implication is that they have a king. Not that they have like many kings. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is because when we get Ammon and the sons of Mosiah hanging out with the Lamanites, we have instead like this like supposed network of kings. It's not really
Yeah.
clear how that network of kings is actually like built up or anything like that, but we do know that Lamoni is a king and his dad is a higher king, and that in some way Lamoni is answerable to his father king, and beyond that we don't really have like a whole lot of like how this network actually is structured, what the lines of succession look like, anything along those lines. But
Monarchy, but extra steps.
right, and you have like a monarch and then like these vassal kings that are below him, and then but again we don't really have any sense of how that succession would actually work in this network or any of that.
Yeah.
All that to say that and then later on, sorry, there is one more step in all of this. When we get again into the Lamanites, we have Amalickiah going in, and he, by subterfuge and through poisoning, manages to take over the Lamanites by assassinating their king. And I mean, he pretty much literally has a guy like hide a spear and stab the king in
I was
broad daylight.
like,
Uh,
little Hamlet-esque over there, but all right.
yeah. So, but what that gives the indication to in that section is that we're back to this idea of like a king over
Yeah.
the
Singular.
Lamanites, right? Just the shifts that are happening in the structure of the Lamanites are odd and
Now,
unique.
let me ask you, so this shift, is this an actual shift in the very real life of the Lamanites, or is this Joseph forgot and Now we've got
I,
extra kings. Psych, we're back to one king. Like,
yeah, I think the latter is closer to it because there isn't like really a whole lot to build off of in the first place with this.
yeah.
And I mean, you could probably look at like you could probably do what apologists want to do and look at Maya society, pre-classical Maya society.
Hmm.
And I don't know why you would look at the Maya for the Lamanites, but this is what they would do because the Maya are both the Lamanites and the Nephites, and they're neither one because we can't say that the Maya were anybody.
Right.
Um, or that the Nephites and Lamanites were attached to actually any group, but we definitely want the Jaredites to be the Olmecs, and we definitely want the Nephites and the Lamanites to be the Maya. Um, the Mesoamerican apologetics are just a jumbled mess, by the way. Anyway, you could probably find in that culture like a sense of like you have the leader of this particular community who could be
Hmm.
thought of as a king for that community, who is in vassalage to someone who is over like the broader network of communities. You could
Okay.
probably find that. Could you find that at the same time that you could find democratically elected judges in another section of the
I
same
was
people?
gonna say,
I doubt it.
I have
Um,
questions.
because you need that, right? Like you need both of
Right.
those things to exist at the same time. But also, like, is that like kingship? Like, you could make the argument that that's what's going on here and all of that, but it's at that point in time, it's like you're trying to like call like the Duke of Sandwich or whatever a king,
Right.
because like he's in line to succeed the throne or whatever.
If
I don't know. I
800
don't follow the
people
royal
die
family in
before
England,
him,
so
yeah,
right.
I
I'm not following the British monarchy anytime soon. I did see a very red painting, and I thought that was hilarious. But apart from that, um, yeah, you could make the argument, right, that these like noble figures who are the head of their communities are kings, but they're sub kings that answer to a higher king. And in a way, like there have been European cultures that have done that sort of thing before.
yeah.
Um, so it's like it's not unprecedented, but it does also just completely disappear when it's not convenient to the story.
I'm
Uh,
like, but it's not even consistently bad.
right. Like
It's not one
Amalickiah should
bad theory, it's
like
multiple.
Amalickiah should not be able to just do an assassination and then become the king over everybody. Right? Like that if you have like an established culture with like laws and like all of that, this sort of subterfuge conquest should not work this way. Now, could it? Possibly. Like
Well, I
it is
mean,
possible that you could have your society
currently
set that way.
currently in America, yeah. I mean,
Uh, well, I mean, even like American influence in other places, like I guess it's kind of what the CIA does, but
it's
um,
fair. That's fair. That's fair.
you're
That's
also
fair.
you're also doing that with typically with trying to like take like what's like democratically elected government and then putting in like a military coup and using that as your way of kind of controlling. It's not the same thing.
No.
Um, it's not the same thing. It would be like it would be like trying to assassinate the King of England in order to become the King of England yourself.
Well, that's totally reasonable, though.
And I think like there might be ways you could do it if you weasel your way in, and supposedly that's what Amalickiah does. But
Yeah.
anyway, what that actually really feeds into, we'll get into that when we actually get into the war chapters. What that really feeds into is that we'll see in this section that anytime a Nephite is in the room, the Nephite ends up taking way more power than they rightly should. Even if like you have this like the auspices of the Lamanite imposing power or imposing gifts onto the Nephites, if a Nephite is trying to assert power over a Lamanite, he will do so. And we'll have that with Amulon later on in the story, where he just ends up leading this, basically just taking over this army of Lamanites. And then the king of the Lamanites is like, hey, you're a cool dude. I'm gonna like give you dominion over this spot because
Yeah,
whatever.
it seems fun.
Seems totally cool, even though you're coming from this group that I previously had as a vassal group, and you're supposed to be under that group. The only time that this appears as an exception, like at all, is in this story of like Xanath's people, and that's because they kind of willingly enter into this vassal treaty with the king of the Lamanites, and then they are oppressed for it. Because remember, the Lamanites are supposed to be like this like scourge on the Nephites.
Yeah.
And so, this thing to remind them or to cast them up to repentance and all of that. And so that's the role that they play for Xanath's people. Yeah. But otherwise, like you have like the Gadian robbers who are Nephites who end up assuming power over the Lamanites. You end up with Amalickiah. You wind up even Ammon when he's like hanging out with like and Sons of Mosiah, even they assert power over the Lamanites. Eventually, like the people that group of Lamanites becomes the people of Ammon because of that. So it's pretty consistent in the narrative that if a Nephite is in the room, he has the power. And
the exception,
and the exceptions to it end up they serve a different narrative function, or they're serving a specific narrative function, and that is to be the thing that reminds them of, or to call them up to repentance. It's the scourge side of that. It's never, it's like there's not an exception that I can think of to that anywhere in the narrative.
No.
So, yeah, we have Gideon and King Limhi wanting to get out of this situation that they're in, get out of this vassalage treaty somehow. And the only way that they realize that the only way to do that is to get back to Zarahemla. And they remember the words of Abinadi somehow. And in chapter 21, we get this whole story about how they want to get back to Zarahemla. They want to escape from the situation that they're in. They're not sure like how they're going to do that. And they get super distrusting of anybody approaching their borders. Like if anybody comes close to their borders, it's clearly a threat. Obviously. And like even the king of the Lamanites at this point in time is like kind of turned against them because of some conflicts and violence and all that that's transpired after their treaty there. And then all of a sudden Ammon and his people show up. This is not the Sons of Mosiah Ammon. This is another Ammon. This is the spy Ammon that Mosiah sends out. If you remember all the way back to chapter like 7 and 8, this is that Ammon.
Gotcha. Okay.
So Ammon shows up and he's back, and like there was much rejoicing, right? And after they work through their differences,
I was gonna say immediately, or
yeah, they have to find out that like, oh hey, actually we're from Zarahemla, and like, oh hey, great, we were trying to get there. It's at that point when we like caught all the way back up with the story of Ammon that the narrative in chapter 21 verse 25 is like, oh, and by the way, Limhi had sent out a couple of people to find the place, or to find Zarahemla again, but they took a wrong turn and ended up finding those Jaredite plates. Remember when we mentioned that all the way back before? Yeah, this is that story. Yeah, by the way, that happened before Ammon showed up, by the way.
Of course.
So there's this repetition that happens in there, and it breaks up the flow of the narrative, and it's weird. And I think that it's perfectly consistent with somebody doing an oral dictation of a story that they have in their head, and they're trying to get everything down, and they're not doing edits, and they tell this whole story. They get caught up and like, oh crap, I forgot to mention this thing. By the way, this happened before. As opposed to somebody who is like etching down in metal plates this particular narrative, and they have this source text that they're pulling from, that they're referencing, and they're abridging this narrative, and they're trying to bring it back in a coherent way that's a coherent summation of events, like what the text is claiming to be.
Are you saying this was a clip show in the Book of Mormon?
I don't know that I would call this a clip show incident. I would call this more a airing episodes of Firefly out of order kind of incident.
There we go. Gotcha. Okay, I'm on board now.
Yeah.
Thank you for speaking in my language. I appreciate that.
Like, imagine if the finale of Firefly had aired first as kind of like a teaser for what's going to, happen later on. And then you got all the way back caught up with the finale where like that episode was in, like, oh crap, we forgot to air episode 7.
Right.
And then you air episode, and that's pretty much actually what happened to Firefly. Close enough. I mean, they didn't
I
quite
was
do it
like,
that egregiously, but it's pretty
so
close.
I was gonna say, so real life then is what
Yeah.
you're okay.
Pretty much what happened, right? And that's what happens at this part. Only the Book of Mormon does not get canceled at this point. It continues on and on and on and on. We still haven't even gotten into Alma.
Oh God, that's right. It's okay. Be strong. I got this. Okay. Cool.
Okay, so then Ammon and Gideon and Limhi, they come up with this super sophisticated plan of getting the Lamanites super drunk, and they escape without any hitch or curveball, no problems whatsoever, no danger.
Of course.
They make their way out of the city and reach Zarahemla, and there was much rejoicing. And that is basically the end of their particular story until, we
later
kind of link. And honestly, like, the only person I think who really shows up again in this narrative is Gideon, which is actually pretty surprising that Gideon shows up in Alma chapter 1, but it is the same Gideon that will show up in Alma 1. The Book of Mormon tends to not reuse characters that way, but Gideon, my man. Gideon was one of my favorite characters in the Book of Mormon, in part because of that, like, because he shows up in more than one place.
Because he comes back.
Like, not many characters actually do that. So apart from the notes that wine ends up being this like get out of jail free card in the Book of Mormon in quite a few places, we're going to get another bondage narrative right next to our last bondage narrative. And just to recall, the first one happened because the people were wicked. They were being punished for their iniquities. God was slow to listen to them because of that.
Right.
What we have with the story of the people of Alma is 450 people who are super righteous. They are great. They're like, hey, Alma, we want you to be our king. And he's like, nah, bro, we shouldn't have kings because, like, if all of our kings could be righteous, that would be chill. But you can't always have righteous kings. And so, like, just remember how King Noah was. And they're like, oh, yeah. And then, like, no cap or whatever. I don't know.
No, I remember that the no cap part was actually a scripture mastery scripture.
Yeah, exactly. And then they decide to like not have a king, and then they live in the land of Helam. So the character of Helam doesn't get mentioned again. Instead, he becomes a land, and they make Alma their high priest, which, as a very religious group of 450 people, the high priest would effectively probably be the king anyway. Is my guess. So they kind of already have a king. It's just a theocracy instead of a monarchy. Anyway, in verse 21, so remember, we've had all this righteousness. They're doing great. They're being industrious. They're doing stuff right.
Good
in
for
verse
them.
21, the Lord seeth fit to chasten his people. Yea, he trieth their patience and their faith. Boy, that Adonai, such a swell guy.
Why do you have to go and tinkle in their Kool-Aid? Stuff's going good, man.
They are doing fine on their own. If they'd just been left alone, they would have been this prosperous, righteous people who would have done, great stuff. And instead, what's going to happen is that the leader of the priests of Noah, who was called Amulon, we find out finally, all this time later, that his name was Amulon. Amulon is not named before this. He was not named back when Abinadi was doing stuff. We don't know what Amulon's involvement was with anything before. We just know that at this point in time, he's the leader. And they run
Sure.
into the army of the Lamanites that was hunting down the people of Limhi, and they're like, "Hey, let's join forces." And the
Sure.
Lamanites are like, "Beat." Um, and so they do that, and then they wander in the wilderness some more, and they find the people of Alma just hanging out in the land of Helam, and they subjugate them and put them into bondage.
Sure.
And as you do,
Just like, I mean, Christopher Columbus, they're just keeping it
pretty
real.
much, pretty much.
Yeah.
And Ambulon gets favor in the eyes of the king of the Lamanites, and he takes over. Eventually, this will be a whole group of people that are called the Ambulonites. Later on, when we get into this refresh narrative, and they're going to be part of the group that really, really, really doesn't like the people of Lamoni, or the people of Ammon.
They sound like a transformer, their name. This is
Yeah, a little
Emulon,
bit,
or an evil
yeah,
wizard.
or an evil wizard, which,
Yeah.
given that he was a wicked priest, is probably not far off.
I was gonna say, let's go with the evil wizard part.
So
Fits the narrative better.
the people, let's see. So Amulon caused that the language of the people of Nephi should be taught to the Lamanites, which I guess is going to be important for later on. But again, is also part of this whole imperialism thing that,
Yeah.
and the Lamanites' language is in some way inferior, right?
Of course.
It's
Yeah.
and that's why it can be easily subjugated by just some guy.
This is Frank from accounting. He's gonna come and take over now.
So Amulon's really just is he ends up being a slave master, and he just subjugates the people of Alma, and the people of Alma just pray, and they pray silently in their heads, and God is like, dude, you guys are being super awesome. I'm gonna make your burdens light. And they're like, cool, that's awesome. And
That's
then
so nice.
God is like, hey, so it's time to leave now. And they were like, okay, we'll leave our homes instead of having our homes delivered. That's cool. We'll leave. We'll move somewhere else.
Problem.
These people who subjugated us and enslaved us can have it. And then they leave because God causes a deep sleep. So there's no planning or plotting here. God is just like, all right, sleepy time for the Lamanites, and they leave, and then they rejoice. And God is like, okay, thank you for the rejoicing, but you guys got to keep moving. Otherwise, the Lamanites, they're going to wake up eventually. So you should keep going. And they do that. And then they arrive to King Mosiah, who receives them as well with joy. And there was much rejoicing.
You know what? Way good on God being a bro like that and telling them,
Sure, after allowing them to be put into bondage and slavery. Yeah, super cool.
We're not gonna talk about that part. That's not. No,
that is actually how Christian apologists really deal with the slavery issue in the Bible. we're just not going to talk about it.
Don't look at the racism behind that curtain. No.
To be fair, biblical slavery was not racist because the concept did not exist.
Because none of it's real. I mean, what?
Well, no, yeah, racism is a purely a social construct that has no biological basis whatsoever. Therefore, racism then is also very dumb.
Racism is real. This part's not.
This part's
scripture.
Not.
Right.
And it's likely that the slavery described in the Bible did not actually happen the way that it's described in the Bible. So I guess in that sense, it's also not real. But the codes that are described are, of note. And yeah, that's a whole thing. So anyway, that is really what I have for Mosiah 18 through 24. It's a bit. There's some interesting stuff, I think, from a believing perspective that happens in here. But from a critical perspective, you have two bondage narratives side by side that I think really do not speak very favorably of God. And then that's about it. And then the baptism thing I thought was kind of an interesting question with a kind of a bit of a fizzle of a resolution, but we'll take a fizzle on this one.
Yeah. I stand by my like a virgin synchronized baptism theory.
If there is nothing else that you take away from this, just take away Arnold
Yeah.
Kreberg like a virgin.
That's exactly, yes. You're welcome. You're welcome.
You are welcome. The next time that you go to the conference center and they take you on the painting tour and you see that painting, just start humming like a virgin.
Okay.
I think that is exactly what our audience should take away from this section.
Yes. I mean, that's what I thought we were talking about. I don't know what the other stuff was, right?
Yeah. So next time we're going to ultimately get into the Book of Alma, but we're going to really talk about Paul. We're going to talk a whole lot about Paul. And we're going to talk about Paul because Paul is, he's going to kind of show up in the text in a pretty material and meaningful way. And
really? All right, cool.
we might do some jumping around a little bit just to help tighten up the narrative a bit, or to tighten up the story that we're going to tell, because I think that if we look at these stories just on their own, there's a bit lost. And then also we're going to kill off the kings and we're going to get into the reign of judges, and that's going to be, we'll start the Book of Alma. So that is what we're looking to do next time. But other than that, this is a short one, but thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you.